Mirror Peppa. The day began like any other. A light morning rain tapped against the window, and the sky was dull and gray. Peppa woke up and went to the bathroom. The mirror above the sink looked cloudy, not from steam, but as if it was fogged from the inside. When she lifted her head to look at her reflection, it blinked, just a second too late. It was almost imperceptible, but a chill crept down her spine. Throughout the day, the mirror seemed normal, but whenever Peppa was alone, she felt the reflection behaving differently. It would freeze, stare directly at her, tilting its head slightly as if studying her. Sometimes she caught its gaze, and something deep inside her recoiled. There was no recognition. It wasn't her. By the third day, Peppa entered the bathroom late at night. In the dark, the mirror gleamed like a still puddle. She switched on the light and froze. The reflection showed the same bathroom, but the walls were cracked, the tiles peeling, and her toothbrush lay broken on the floor. Everything was dusty, as if no one had entered that place in years. Later, she noticed her reflection not only moved with a delay, but continued staring even after she looked away. Once it smiled, wide, unnatural, while she stood still, her own lips unmoving. The smile didn't fade. On the fourth night, she awoke to a soft tapping. It was coming from the bathroom. As she got closer, she heard it clearly. Tap, tap, tap. Like tiny fingers knocking from the inside of the glass. The air turned cold. Fingerprints appeared, small like hers, but distorted, with long claw-like nails. Her reflection stood motionless, just watching. She covered the mirror with a blanket, but in the morning the fabric was on the floor. New prints smudged the glass. For a split second, a figure had passed through the reflection, tall, black and faceless, shaped like her. Peppa's behavior began to change. She grew quieter, paler. She'd stand in front of the mirror for long stretches, unmoving. Her parents didn't notice anything wrong. It seemed like she was just growing up. But there was no light in her eyes anymore. Eventually, the real Peppa realized she was trapped inside. She couldn't get out. The mirror had become the border. At first, she pounded on it, screamed, but no one heard. The outside reflection lived her life. It ate, played, smiled, but it was hollow, mechanical. It kept glancing at the mirror, gently touching the surface, testing it, almost curiously. From within, Peppa felt the glass becoming stronger each day. Her fists left no marks. Her voice didn't echo, not even in her own head. She couldn't feel her fingers anymore. Just cold, just endless darkness. Sometimes drawings appeared on the floor outside, childlike. Dark figures with oversized eyes, crooked hearts. The last drawing showed two Peppas, one standing outside the mirror, the other inside. Their eyes were connected by a thick black line. Between them it read, "You are here now." The mirror no longer reflected anyone. Peppa Pig. Cursed puddle. It was a light, rainy day, and George was especially excited. He loved jumping in muddy puddles. While Peppa stayed inside drawing, George ran outside in his rubber boots and began happily splashing around the familiar yard. But after a few minutes, he noticed a strange puddle, dark, motionless, with a weird shimmer on its surface. It was off to the side near the old tree, and he was sure it hadn't been there before. George walked closer. The puddle looked deeper than the others. He smiled, took a running start, and jumped right into the center. The splash sounded dull, like he'd landed not in water, but in something thick. He looked down. The water was nearly black, and in the reflection he didn't see himself. Only a shadow, long and twisted. At first, George felt nothing. But as he walked back to the house, his legs grew heavier, his body colder. Daddy Pig greeted him at the door and immediately noticed something was wrong. George was silent, his eyes dull, his skin slightly gray. He didn't speak at dinner, just sat there with an empty stare, completely still. The next morning, Peppa found George in her room. He was standing by the window, staring at the puddle, but now his eyes were entirely black. When she called his name, he turned and hissed softly. His face had lengthened, his lips were cracked, and his teeth were longer and sharper. Peppa screamed. The family gathered in panic. Daddy Pig tried to approach, but George pushed him away with inhuman strength. Thick black liquid oozed from his skin. His arms were stretching, and his legs began to split, like those of a swamp creature. He no longer spoke, only made low, gurgling noises. Mummy Pig tried calling someone, but the phone wouldn't work. The screen was covered in the same black moisture, as if the puddle had entered the house. That evening, George disappeared. The back door stood wide open, and the puddle had grown even larger. Now it pulsed like it was alive, and reflected not the house, but something else. Daddy Pig went out to investigate, and never returned. Then Mummy Pig. Peppa was the last one left. She locked herself in her room, hearing claws scrape the floors, and the black liquid bubbling in the hallway. She knew it was George, but it wasn't really him anymore. The creature stopped at her door and spoke in her own voice. "Peppa, come play in the puddles." The lights went out. The footsteps drew near. In the morning, the house was empty, and the puddle in the yard was even wider. And in it, something was still reflected. Peppa Pig, the static channel. It was an ordinary rainy evening. A fine drizzle tapped against the windows. The sky was overcast and the house was unusually quiet. Mummy Pig was cooking, Daddy Pig was reading the newspaper, and George had fallen asleep on the floor, tired from playing with his dinosaur. Peppa sat on the sofa, flipping through the channels, trying to find something interesting. But every show seemed boring. She was about to turn the TV off when she noticed a strange channel. It had no number, and instead of a picture, it was just gray static. White noise, flickering and broken, with faint shadows dancing in it, as if something was moving inside the screen. Peppa didn't immediately realize why she wasn't changing the channel. Something about that noise drew her in. It felt like something was behind it. And then, after a few seconds, she heard whispering from deep within the static. It was muffled, distorted, like someone speaking underwater. Peppa squinted and leaned closer. The whispering grew clearer. The voices were childlike and familiar. One sounded just like Susie, the other like Miss Rabbit. But the words were strange, nonsensical. They seemed to be calling her. "Peppa, can you hear us? Peppa, come closer." Peppa called for her mummy, but no one answered. The voices got louder, overlapping, piling on top of each other, and the white noise began to ripple like water. And then she saw it, a silhouette, tall, stretched out, with a distorted head. It stood deep within the screen. She couldn't fully make it out, but it moved, slowly, as if trying to come through. And just as Peppa took a step back, the TV turned off by itself. No click, no flicker. The screen simply went black. A dead silence filled the room. George was still asleep. Mummy and Daddy didn't answer. Peppa felt completely alone. She walked up to the TV, and it turned back on. But this time she hadn't touched anything. There was no more static, just blackness, total darkness. And from within that darkness, a pair of eyes stared back at her, dark as the void, unblinking. They didn't move, but Peppa felt that the thing on the other side knew her. Then the screen began to warp, like something heavy was pushing against it. The outline became clearer. A hand, thin with long fingers, slowly forcing itself out of the screen. Then another, then the head, and Peppa finally saw the face. It looked like her own, but pale-skinned, blue-lipped, and with eyes black as the TV screen. The creature crawled almost all the way out. It clumsily stepped onto the floor and stared directly at Peppa. She backed away, tried to scream, but her voice was gone. The creature suddenly spoke, in her exact voice. It whispered softly, "Now you're the one on the other side." The world jerked. In an instant, everything flipped. Peppa felt a rush of cold and crushing darkness. She wasn't in the room anymore. She was looking out, from inside the television, through the flickering static, through a warped reflection. And the creature outside turned toward Mummy Pig, who had just walked into the room, and smiled. Mummy Pig didn't notice anything wrong. She gently stroked Peppa on the head and said dinner was ready. The creature nodded and followed her. The real Peppa, from the other side of the screen, screamed, but no one could hear her. The TV returned to white noise.